Right, diving right in today, we've got a topic that's, well, it's a bit of a must-know, especially if you're gearing up for those UPSC exams, and international relations is your jam. We're going to tackle the big stuff, the forces shaping global politics, those fascinating elements of continuity and those sometimes surprising changes.
Yeah, it's about, peeking behind the curtain. It's more than just the headlines. We're talking about those underlying systems, the mechanisms that really drive things. Think of it like, I don't know, like getting those cheat codes, for decoding international relations, whether you're hitting the books for the UPSC or just want to understand what's going on in the world.
Okay, so let's get down to it. Our source material today is, well, it really digs into three major themes: power, security, and justice. And I know those might sound a little textbooky, but trust me, these concepts, they're anything but static. They're constantly evolving, just like the global landscape itself.
And that's where things get really interesting, right? Power, for instance, it's not just about who's got the biggest military anymore. It's much more nuanced than that.
Right, exactly. We're not in some simple Cold War chess match anymore.
Yeah.
So where does power actually reside in today's world? I mean, is it still with the traditional players?
Well, the argument for a U.S.-led global order, or even a global hegemon, as some call it, uh, I think it's safe to say it's lost some steam, especially after, well, the events of the last decade or so.
It really does feel like everyone's trying to figure out the new rules of the game, doesn't it? You've got these rising powers like China, India, and then you've got non-state actors making their presence known. And then technology. I mean, technology is completely reshaping the playing field.
Exactly. And think about the impact of social media on political movements or even how terrorist groups, well, how they leverage the internet. Technology has really empowered actors who were, for a long time, they were marginalized. It's giving them a global platform and reach.
So it's not just about states anymore. We're seeing this like diffusion of power with more players at the table and even, new ways to wield influence. It's like that old saying, power is where you think it is, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's particularly important for understanding India's position in the world, right? As a rising power, India isn't just reacting to events anymore. It's actively shaping them.
Which brings us to another really interesting point: the changing nature of power itself. The source, it highlights this concept of soft power, which seems, well, it seems especially relevant in today's world.
Right, right. Think of it this way. Hard power, it's like forcing someone to do something, while soft power, it's about getting them to want to do it. It's about attraction, persuasion, using your culture, your values, and your policies to kind of shape perceptions.
So is India leveraging soft power effectively? I mean, everyone loves Bollywood, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, India's soft power, it definitely has potential. Uh, you think about their vibrant diaspora, the global appeal of things like yoga and Ayurveda. There are a lot of tools in their arsenal, but using them strategically, using them consistently, that's key.
This raises a fascinating question, though. In this age of, soft power and interconnectedness, is military might, like, is it becoming less relevant?
Ah, that's a good one. That's a really hotly debated topic. Some people argue that, yeah, military power is becoming obsolete, especially in a world where things like economic and technological prowess are becoming more and more important. But others, they say hard power is still necessary, especially when you've got actors out there who don't exactly play by the rules.
So I guess it's about finding the right balance then, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing that the tools of power are evolving and then adapting your strategy to fit that new reality.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us into the next big idea: security. Traditionally, we thought of security in terms of, national defense, protecting borders, protecting ourselves from those external threats. But the world's gotten a lot more complex, right?
Right. It's definitely not just about armies and tanks anymore. We've got, I mean, you think about it, we've got global terrorism, we've got pandemics that completely ignore borders, and cyber attacks that can just, you know, cripple entire countries, and they can come from anywhere in the world.
And this is where this concept of global security comes in. It's recognizing that those threats are increasingly transnational. They're interconnected. Climate change, for example, it's a security threat that, well, it doesn't respect national boundaries.
And then there's the idea of human security, which, I mean, it broadens the definition even further. It's about, protecting individuals from all sorts of threats, not just military ones. Think about things like food security, access to healthcare, protection from environmental disasters.
This shift in thinking, I think, is crucial, particularly for those UPSC aspirants out there, understanding the different layers of security, national, global, and human, that's key to really analyzing contemporary international relations.
So we've gone from a fairly straightforward idea of like protect your territory to this much more complex web of interconnected threats and vulnerabilities. And I guess that brings us to, well, our final theme, justice. Is there even such a thing as like justice in international relations?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a question that's been debated for, well, for centuries. You've got realists who argue that, international politics, it's a game of power and justice. Well, justice is often a secondary concern.
It's kind of like might makes right, but on a global scale. But the source also presents a counterargument, right?
Absolutely. Liberals, they argue that no, morality and justice, they have to play a role in international relations. They point to things like the development of international law, human rights norms, institutions like the International Criminal Court. They say that those are evidence that, well, evidence that states they are increasingly bound by ethical considerations.
So it's not just about states pursuing their own interests at all costs.
Well, it's definitely more complicated than that, right? There's this constant tension between the pursuit of national interest and the demands of global justice. So we were starting to get into this whole idea of justice in global politics, right? It's
Right.
one of those things that can feel very theoretical, but it really does have some serious implications in the real world.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you start thinking about things like global poverty, climate change, humanitarian interventions. Those aren't just like abstract concepts. They affect real people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where this idea of global justice comes in, right? It's about recognizing that we've got these moral obligations that extend beyond our national borders.
So it's not just about like what's fair between countries, but what's fair for everyone, regardless of, where they live.
Exactly. Precisely. Thinkers like Peter Singer, for example, he argues that if we have the means to prevent suffering, then we have a moral obligation to do it, even if that suffering even if it's happening in another country.
That's a pretty radical idea, right?
Yeah.
Especially for those who really believe in putting national interests first. But it does make you think. It raises some interesting questions about our responsibility to address global inequality.
It does. It does. And it's a debate that's happening right now in real time,
Yeah.
on issues like global health, climate change, international development assistance.
And this is where things get like really relevant for those UPSC aspirants. Understanding those different perspectives on justice. I mean, it's crucial for analyzing international relations.
Absolutely. It's not just about knowing the definitions. It's about being able to critically evaluate those different arguments and then apply them to real world situations. And speaking of real world situations, can we circle back to power for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So we talked about the diffusion of power, the rise of non-state actors. How is that actually playing out on the world stage?
Well, one of the most striking examples, I think, is the rise of China. Economically, I mean, China is a powerhouse. It's challenging the U.S. for global dominance, and they're not shy about using their economic clout to achieve their geopolitical goals.
Yeah, we're seeing that with China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? I mean, they're investing billions in infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, Europe. It's expanding their influence. It's reshaping global trade patterns.
Exactly. And then there's the military dimension too. China they're rapidly modernizing their armed forces, and they're increasingly assertive in their territorial claims, particularly in the South China Sea. And that's creating tensions with their neighbors and, of course, with the United States.
It's like a real life game of risk, isn't it? With countries vying for power and influence on this global scale. And where does India fit into all of this?
That's the crucial question for Indian policymakers, right? India is also a rising power with a rapidly growing economy and ambitions to play a more prominent role in global affairs.
Well, they face some pretty significant challenges, right? I mean, China is a formidable neighbor.
Absolutely. Managing that relationship with China, it's one of India's top foreign policy priorities. And it's not just about military power either, right? India's also they're leveraging their soft power. using their democratic values, cultural influence, development assistance to try and build partnerships around the world.
And let's not forget about the role of technology in all of this either. I mean, it's a game changer for states, for non-state actors.
Just think about the impact of cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, social media manipulation. These are new tools of power. They can be used to undermine states, to spread propaganda, to influence public opinion.
It's like the battleground has shifted, hasn't it? From traditional warfare to the digital realm, and it's a battleground where, well, where the rules are still being written.
And that makes it all the more challenging to navigate, which brings us back to security, I think.
Hmm.
In this age of interconnected threats, how do we even define security anymore?
Yeah, it's definitely not just about protecting borders anymore. It's about protecting people from a whole range of threats, from pandemics to climate change to cyber attacks.
This is where that concept of human security comes in. It's a people-centered approach to security that recognizes that threats can come from many different sources, and that security is about more than just military strength.
So it's about ensuring that people have access to, those basic needs like
Yeah.
food, water, healthcare, and protecting them from violence and persecution.
Exactly. It's about creating a world where everyone can live in safety and dignity. And that means addressing those global challenges, right? Poverty, inequality, climate change.
That's a huge shift in thinking from a state-centric view of security to this more holistic, people-centered approach.
And it has implications for how we think about justice too, right? If security is about protecting people, then justice has to be about ensuring that everyone has the same rights and opportunities.
Which brings us, well, full circle, I guess, back to that core question of justice and international relations. Is it even possible in a world where power is so unequally distributed?
That's the $1 million question, and it's a question that UPSC aspirants they're going to need to grapple with that as they analyze those complex dynamics of global politics.
It's definitely a lot to think about. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From the shifting balance of power to the evolving nature of security threats and the ever-present challenge of achieving global justice.
But we're not done yet. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how these ideas are, how they're playing out in specific regions on specific issues, and we'll consider what the future might hold for global politics. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last two parts, well, kind of unpacking some pretty dense concepts, right? Power, security, justice. It's the kind of stuff that can, make your head spin a little, but it also makes you realize just how connected everything is.
It really does, yeah. It's like we've given you, like, I don't know, like a new set of glasses to view global events through. You can see those underlying forces, those power struggles, those security dilemmas, and that constant push and pull between what's good for one country and what's good for everyone.
So now that we've kind of laid the groundwork, I guess, can we get a little more specific? What are some like real world examples of where these ideas are playing out right now? The kind of things that our UPSC aspirants should definitely have on their radar.
Sure, yeah. Let's start with something a little closer to home. The Indo-Pacific region. It's really become the epicenter of global geopolitics. You've got China's rise, India's, growing ambitions, and the U.S. trying to hold on to its influence. It's a region it's full of opportunity, but it's also, it's got its fair share of tension.
And it's a perfect illustration of how those three key themes that we've been talking about, power, security, and justice,
Yeah.
they're all tangled up together, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. You've got China, and they're flexing their economic and military muscle. They're building those artificial islands in the South China Sea, and they're really challenging the existing regional order.
And then you've got India. They're trying to balance, well, their own economic growth and of course, security concerns, but also their commitment to democratic values and a rules-based international system.
It's a tough balancing act, and it's one that really requires a deep understanding of, well, the history, the power dynamics, and those potential flashpoints that could turn into conflict.
Speaking of flashpoints, I
Mm.
mean, the situation in Ukraine, it's a stark reminder of how quickly things can escalate when those security concerns, those power rivalries, they collide.
It is. It's a classic example of that security dilemma we talked about.
Right.
One country trying to, just trying to make themselves feel safer, and another country sees that as a threat, and it just leads to this spiral of insecurity and mistrust.
And it also shows you the limits of international law and those institutions in a world where power politics, it often wins out over diplomacy and cooperation.
Yeah, and the Ukraine conflict, it raises questions about global justice too, right? What responsibility do other countries have to step in to intervene in situations like this? At what point does inaction become, well, I don't know, complicit?
Those are tough questions. There aren't any easy answers,
Yeah.
but they're questions that future diplomats and policymakers they're going to have to wrestle with.
And that's why understanding these concepts is so crucial. Not just for those UPSC aspirants, but for anyone who really wants to make sense of what's going on in the world.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected. Something happens in one part of the world, and it can have these ripple effects,
Yeah.
across the globe.
It's about understanding those forces that are shaping our future, the economic trends, the technological innovations, those demographic shifts, and those ideological battles they're happening on the world stage.
And it's about being prepared to navigate a world that's just getting more and more complex, more and more uncertain, and honestly, more and more challenging.
So I guess as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought for you to kind of chew on. All right, if power is becoming more spread out, if those security threats are becoming more transnational, and if the demand for global justice, if it's getting louder, well, what does that mean for the future of global governance?
What role are states going to play? What about non-state actors?
Yeah.
And how can we actually build a more just and sustainable world order in a time of, well, unprecedented change and this level of interconnectedness?
These are the questions that are gonna define the 21st century, and they're questions that we really encourage you to keep exploring.
And as always, we encourage you to like and subscribe to the deep dive. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the big ideas that are shaping our world. So until then, stay curious.